Welcome back.
We've had a break.
We've had a little break. So we're finally going to do it. We're going to talk about the Sagrada Familia, the most famous Gaudí building, one of the most famous buildings ever, I guess, as a bit of architecture. If you ask someone to say, I'm guessing here, I imagine in the Wikipedia page for architecture, it probably has a picture of the Sagrada Familia and a picture of Sydney Opera House, don't you think? Maybe the Parthenon.
Might do, yeah. I don't know. I mean, Wikipedia can be slightly erratic at times.
We
could put this to the test, but it's probably certainly one of the most visited modern buildings for its architectural merit in the world.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know if it was probably as a building which is just charging entry to look at a building. It probably makes more money than any other building.
It's synonymous with Gaudí as an individual, with the idea of kind of creativity in architecture, I guess, in the kind of broader public consciousness.
I mean, we didn't do an intro, by the way. I don't know if that matters. Perhaps
This is a podcast called About Buildings and Cities. I'm Luke Jones.
I'm George Kinchell. Well, there's good reasons for it being associated with him, because he started... he was made head architect of this church when he was 33, before he had built almost anything.
Yeah.
I think he'd done that Workers' Cooperative Arch and the fountain and the street lights and maybe a couple of things.
Yeah, sort of in, about like 1887, I think he was appointed.
Something like that.
And
he worked on it until the day he died for 40-something years. It's unusual an architect works that long on something. Yeah. And people's creative output changes over that longer period of time. That's not to say that they were building huge amounts all the way through.
Most of the
what it's been like ever since.
Most of the building is posthumous.
Oh, yes, enormously. But even of what he got it built in spurts.
So, I mean, the story of the project is that there was a guy called, I think he's called is he called Juan Bocabella or something like that? The guy was like a pious bookseller who went on a pilgrimage to the shrine of Our Lady at Loreto in Italy, which is the church which houses the house of the Virgin Mary. And it has this sort of like funny little building within a building which houses it. And it also has this very famous statue of the Virgin in black stone. So
in this building within a building, is there her house?
Yeah. And there's also a statue of her, I think. Yeah.
And looks cool. I haven't been.
And he was basically inspired to create a church of the Holy Family in this district, which was part of the kind of expanding city, like a working class district. And so was formed the junta, who were to kind of raise the money and kind of superintend the project. From then.
He must have been fairly charismatic, because he didn't have any independent means at all. He was a working class or lower middle class
guy,
citizen of Barcelona, of a not particularly upscale district of Barcelona, who decided to build, I think initially a church, but quite rapidly determined to build a very large church, and I guess got it off the ground with the force of his charisma and religious calling.
Like the 19th century was definitely an era where a lot of stuff got built by subscription. It's quite a big...
Churches frequently got built by subscription, but rarely at this scale.
Yeah.
Although, as Luke has pointed out with the first slide, it didn't start as being quite so heroic.
Yeah, so it didn't start, and it also didn't start with Gaudí as an architect. So the original architect is a guy called Francisco de Paula del Villar, who took the project on site in 1882 and then resigned a year later in 1883. And the reason, I mean, it's still a bit like Gaudí had only graduated, I think, about 5 years before, and it's a bit weird for him to take over.
He was considerably younger than us.
Yeah, it's an odd one. I think the way that it worked is like this. The junta had an architect on the board, or like a kind of architectural advisor, who was this guy, Joan Martorell, who was Gaudí's professor and his kind of supporter, and someone who got him a lot of his early projects and made certain introductions. And I think that's, for them, it might almost have been, because he was an advisor, he was ineligible to be considered as the architect by the rules of propriety. But in a way, I think they might almost have thought of appointing Gaudi as being kind of a way to get him to be the architect, really. Obviously, like later, there are all these sort of stories. Like later, they would tell a story that Boccabella had like a dream that the architect would have piercing blue eyes. That's the story.
Cool.
Which apparently Gaudi also had. But I think that sounds like a joke.
But we can very early on see a confliction in the instincts of this council, which is that the initial design is for a Gothic parish church. It has some sort of slight Romanesque bits, some slight Baroque bits, and it was published to raise funds, and is of a sort of normal, fairly good size.
Yeah.
But within months, I forget the name of the first architect, but he is producing schemes that are 3 times as tall and enormous.
Yeah. So who do you think is driving that?
It's strange because he produces this perfectly
pragmatic, like
buildable, conservative
buildable scheme. Yeah.
And then produces a series of schemes which are considerably more ambitious and actually also more architecturally adventurous, unusual, and then falls out over in an argument that seems to be one about wanting to do things in a more expensive rather than cheaper way. And then they get Gaudi, who they then get to continue this huge growth of scope for the project. So I would say there's definitely a clash of the inspirational and the pragmatic in their decision making. So the scheme, his later schemes involve essentially a very tall, very big, or at least very tall steeple on the church, and we are going off a single set of drawings which can be found on the Spanish Wikipedia page. So that's about the extent of our research.
Yeah, it looks a little bit like Cologne Cathedral or something, doesn't it? The kind of later development of it. It's got like an absolutely mega tower.
There's one,
very
and then there's another one with a very thin but very tall.
Yeah.
It makes me think they wanted people to. It's like a Stadtkroon.
It's a beacon.
It's a beacon.
It's a beacon. It's the beacon. It's the Holy Family kind of calling the new citizens of Barcelona to return to the church and to live lives of in some kind of contact with, I guess, the teachings of the church and that kind of thing. Having lots of children and being
I had heard that, I don't know if this is true, that part of the impulse is pro-natalist. We're going to build this church, the Holy Family, so people have more kids. But let's talk about this church.
Let's talk about the church. Okay, so the original version of the church is it's got an apse at one end, it's got a crossing, it's got a nave, it's got aisles, and then it's got, I guess the big tower is probably meant to be... Where's the big tower meant to be? It's meant to be at the entrance.
I would think it's actually... Or look at those rather thick columns at the crossing.
Is it meant to be over the crossing? Gosh.
Well, I don't know, but they're thick. There are thick columns over the crossing.
Yeah.
But there's thick columns at the entrance as well. Probably something at both.
Bit hard to get the plan to work with any of the elevations.
I think it works with if you go back...
Yeah.
The page even before that, I think it goes with that one, where we have a tower both at the entrance and the crossing, and I think this was the published scheme.
Right, yeah. And it has a kind of an apse with an ambulatory and with radiating chapels. The kind of top end of it looks like very French Gothic, and the lower bit of it has a touch of the English almost about it, and
And it is the length, just less than the length of the city block, built up area, occupying at this stage, I would say, about a third of the grounds of the available space within the block. That it's being built on a whole one of these grid squares, which at this point, as we pointed out, were definitely not all occupied at all.
Yeah. And then the kind of as-built church, the revised scheme gets much wider. it retains more or less the same length, but it goes outward.
Well, it sort of spills out a bit into the next block as well. But yes, it's the as built probably occupies 60% of the ground plan, of the buildable area in the city block.
Which it does by doubling the aisles, and then also additionally there's this whole kind of ring of like a kind of outer cloister that actually circles the whole of the church, which is kind of a
It's really strange looking at this plan, and we will go through the history of its design and development.
Yeah,
but that plan does not speak to what the building feels like at all.
No,
it looks like a relatively normal cathedral in a box.
Yeah.
And then you can see a few other things. You can see that it's got an extra row of columns. So it's got 2 rows of columns on either side, such that there are, well, 2 along the main axis and then 1 row on each side of the crossing, making it very wide. And then it has really thick towers on the 2 sides of the crossing.
Yeah.
Really thick, which would kind of point to like there being a lot above that, which there in fact is. And then the next reading of that you can see is that at the apse ends, the plan is the same.
Yeah.
As the original one, except that it's now buried within a lot more church.
Yeah.
And that will point to the fact that, unlike with St. Peter's, a bigger church but only a bit bigger, in its development, when the design was shifted radically, it often caused a certain amount of demolition of existing works.
Yeah.
I don't think at any point in the building of this project was there sufficient confidence to demolish anything that had been already done.
Yeah.
The work has proceeded with no reverse gear, meaning that any brick laid at any point of its development stayed and has then been built upon.
Yeah. Yes. So it's got a little bit wider, but it's got a lot taller. I mean, there were those kind of early schemes which do show like very tall towers, but over the course of its development, it did become enormously higher across the whole body of the church. You know, if you visit it today, the thing which is extremely striking is that it's enormously tall, even in the aisles, and the kind of middle bits of it are just like super, super high, and an effect which is accentuated by the relatively close spacing of these columns.
Correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I have struggled to put together the chronology of the design and construction of this building very thoroughly. But my impression is that it reached in the design maybe most of its size by the 1890s, when it was still a completely Gothic design. There was a proposal put out of a design which was almost this enormous size, but Gothic.
Yeah.
When Gaudí took the project on, the project was building the crypt at one end, the apse end. And so he took it on in 83.
Yeah.
And I think by about 95, he had built the first and second story of columns of the apse, and that's it. But had scoped the project to its current scale, although a completely different design.
Yeah.
Well, we can go through those.
So there are some photos.
So if we go through those, so that is the project in, I think, the 1890s, and it's just and everything you see there is still there. But what you see is something which is a Gothic round apse. It could almost be a slightly scaled up, like Henry VII's Chapel.
Yeah.
In Westminster Cathedral. No, I'm in. Well, it should be Westminster. It is Westminster Cathedral, but Westminster Abbey.
Yeah.
It's Gothic. It's pointy. It's got lancet windows. It's already quite big, although it is. You can almost not see this thing now because it's so kind of buried into the building. Yeah. But if you go back to your models, I think in the model photographs, that one is the Gothic. So how much bigger has it got after that?
It doubles. It doubles the aisles.
So it gets another bay. So when it transforms, okay. So the Gothic version, which is being done then, is gone up a size, but it's still actually I was wrong. It does look almost as high though in the main body. No, not quite. Maybe it increases by 25% or something.
So in a way, he's kind of you can see that in the Gothic version it had these quite big flying buttresses. In a way, he's kind of occupying the space that would be filled with them, and then a little bit more.
Yeah, so those flying buttresses. So structurally, the first maneuver he does is he takes this kind of classic Gothic. Well, they're not flying buttresses, are they? They're just buttresses.
No, they're just buttresses. Yeah, they're sinking buttresses. They're flying a little bit on the top level, but you can't really see in the photo.
And he replaces them with another row of columns, bringing the walls out, which presumably is doing the same thing. And in fact, there's freestanding columns, and then there's a gallery in a second row of columns, and that gallery is kind of thick structurally, and I guess that's taking some of the lateral load in the second scheme.
Yeah,
that was being done by the buttresses.
So there was a development of the design where it's becoming a lot more Gaudí-ish. The nave is now one of these big, I'm scared to know what to call it now, parabolic arches.
Yeah, it's a long, thin parabolic arch, tall.
With very thin columns. So it's kind of continuously leaning all the way down. All the columns are leaning in towards the centre of the nave.
And then the second row of columns are vertical,
yeah,
but branch to make parabolic arches.
Yeah, so that there's... it's funny, it's what you would call the triforium, that kind of level in a cathedral normally. But normally the triforium has arches which are kind of following the line of the nave. Yeah. Whereas in this one, they're running perpendicular to it. So it gives this sort of strange kind of waffly, almost sort of space.
Are they not running in both directions?
They might be going in both directions. I can't see in the photo. It gives it. It's almost like a kind of Gaudí space frame sort of.
Yeah, I think that's partly due to the nature of the model making as well. Yeah. And there's a lot of bracing going on in these columns at the level of the gallery, the triforium, and sort of above it. The structure becomes quite complicated in the minor columns as it gets near the top. I think it would have been quite cool, but they look a bit... I think it's beginning to get a bit skeletal.
This one?
Yeah, and there's too many thin branching columns at the top.
And then the third development, which is the one which was built, the columns of the nave are vertical where they meet the ground, although the columns themselves are actually like this strange tapering shape. And then they kind of lean in as they get up towards the top. They branch at a certain point.
Which is about the level of the bottom of the gallery.
Yeah.
Which is raked now. As in, goes back stadium seating.
Yeah, which is the as-built one, where you have these kind of quasi-capitals, which are the point from which the columns all sort of branch up into the height of the church, and it means that it's got higher perceptually because you don't have the kind of apparent floating ceiling of the previous scheme.
So we've got these three sort of things which are represented in models there for us to sort of, because again, like all of these things, that the documentation is incredibly sparse compared to what would be normally. You can get a much better sense of what's going on. To put some sort of dates on them, the Gothic one is going certainly into the early 1890s, definitely, which is the time that he's doing his Gothic project, so it makes sense. The third one is after 1808.
1908.
1908.
Yeah.
No. And so it's after Hanging Model. And the middle one somewhere in between, which gives it a meagre 15 years to exist in. And I would presume that that's coming in when he's working in the Palaguel. Yeah. No, I mean the Parkwell.
Yeah.
Sort of period.
Yeah, maybe around the turn of the century.
Yeah. Where he is also he's kind of starting to try out these leaning columns.
Yeah.
When did we start seeing leaning columns?
Yeah, they're in the Parkwell. What else? I mean, they're not tremendously columny, a lot of the other projects.
Yeah, because there's columns at an angle in even, like, going back to the Gwell Winery, but they're straight.
Yeah.
And kind of more straightforward.
I guess there are leaning walls in the winery, and there are leaning in Bella's Guard as well.
Like, the idea of having something coming out is like Bella's Garden, things like that. And then he's using masonry columns at angles in the park well. And I think that kind of intermediate stage, because these projects that go on to the last version, the version we have now, is definitely informed with this tensile
hanging
metaphor.
model. Yeah, you can absolutely see the sort of strings bunching together.
Although for this, he did the calculations, but all on paper, producing paper static models, which is, I would think, a much easier way of getting precise structural information, is to do it like an engineer.
Yeah.
There are a whole load of things in this cathedral. We haven't planned the episode enough, but there's a whole load of different things to talk about.
Yeah.
There are the facades.
Yeah.
There's 3 sides and the apse side. The apse side we kind of talked about already.
Yeah.
There's one side was built in his life. One kind of mirrors it, but has significant differences.
Yeah.
And there's a third one that's not built yet, but they have a design for it.
Yeah.
And a model exists for it. There is the exterior, like, kind of styling and some, like, strange things. And then there's, like, the effect of the inside, I guess.
I think that there's also something about... So this is the project that he was working on exclusively for the last decade of his life, and the workshop, I think, was a pretty incredible place, and the way that he was working was pretty extraordinary. All of this was lost, and is to some extent being reconstructed, either intellectually or from the traces and kind of photographs and things that exist in the building that's being built now. But there was all kinds of stuff going on there. They had, some of the more like mythical stuff is that he was apparently going and drawing like bodies in the city morgue, or there's a kind of myth, which may well be true, but that the bodies of infants from the hospital were kind of used as source material for the little cherubs and things that appear in some of the sculpture.
Living babies are also available.
They are, yeah. Yeah, and then there are also all of these really strange geometries which are being formed in the workshop out of plaster and other materials. When you visit the cathedral now, there are all of these like incredible sort of strange surfaces and intersections in the masonry. They were apparently forming in this strange workshop with all of these different approaches, kind of building up plaster with different sorts of tools and creating these like curved and doubly curved surfaces and things through working with wet plaster and like moving profiles and things like that.
The plaster work, I would say there's like 1.5 interesting techniques. One of which is, and you get this if you've got like a round bit of cornice in a church or some fancy building, and you just drag a profile round an arc, and you can then get your like molded profile in wet plaster, but you can also get a sort of dish shape that you can then make a load of and cut together to make up these complicated forms. And then for the columns, you can run one molding past it, kind of twisting it as you go. Yeah. And you can then have a second pass.
Yeah, with a different one.
Or with the same one in a different place. Which, if you combine it with kind of twisting the mold as it goes down, gives the quite complicated shape of the columns.
Yeah, there's one which is sort of like a kind of convex octagon or something.
Yeah.
And then at the top it's like a concave, or maybe it's the other way around. It's like a concave octagon and turns into a sort of convex.
Like 16-sided. Fluted thing.
Yeah.
And you can do that by like rotating 2 passes of something to create that shape.
Yeah.
And then we've also spoken about like double curved surfaces or double ruled surfaces, which are 2 totally different things.
Yeah.
Double curved surface just means something that's curved across 2 dimensions, meaning that every point in the shape is curved. And a double ruled surface is like a hyperbolic surface. A hyperbolic shape you can construct with straight lines only. It goes between 2 ellipses or circles, and it goes in at a waist and comes out again. Actual hyperbolic domes, confusingly, as far as I can work out, and I'm probably wrong, are rotations of the hyperbolic curve, but not one that exists on that. It's a rotation of the like section of it, the outside of the section of it, which I found very confusing. But the inside dish shape that's used a lot on the walls, has like crossing straight lines on every point of it.
Yeah.
Which I can see how that's helpful when you're like laying it out. But the like revolved hyperbola that makes up a dome, that is not truthful as far as I can understand. And I can't see how that could possibly be true of a closed convex dome.
Yeah, there are just these lovely photos of the little fragments of the workshops. There's this weird photo on the Spanish Wikipedia of like a fragment of the building in the background, and then in the foreground there are all these like sculptures of snails.
Yeah,
like massive snails just lying around
somewhere. Yeah,
where are they going to go? They're going to go somewhere.
The time that Gaudí was working on it, it was always really fragmentary.
They'd kind of got going with the Nativity facade, which is one of the three big facades. Was that more or less completed during his life? Or
fairly late on, after I think like during the First World War?
Yeah.
They received, or a little earlier than that, they received a big bequest from an elderly widow, and that paid for the facade.
Right.
And that was done pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But the whole budget that they had for the project was the money to build this facade.
Yeah.
There wasn't any money after that. Cathedrals don't take 200 years to build because it takes 200 years to build a cathedral. It doesn't. Even with medieval methods, it takes like 30 years if you're like chucking men at it, maybe even quicker than that.
Yeah.
But it can take 200 years to get the money together.
And it did. It's
well, not 200 years.
Not quite. Yeah, shall we try and describe the outside of the building? Do you think that's the best way to do it? Oh, we're looking at this lovely photo of it surrounded by goats, which I think we referred to back in the first episode.
I think we should describe first the bits that were all built when he was alive.
Yeah.
I think we could then have an exercise about thinking about the bits that were built afterwards.
Yeah.
So when he was alive, it's fairly straightforward what was built. There's the Gothic apse.
Yeah. Which is a sort of a curtain.
Which is basically kind of, going round.
Sort of semicircular curtain.
It doesn't have any of the internal columns that are also there.
Yeah.
It's the kind of bit that's got chapels in it, I think. A couple of bays of the main body, which are made of these sort of like tall pitched roofs, which kind of rack back. There's like a couple of them. The whole Nativity facade, including its 4 towers, a huge Gothic, sculpted portal arrangement.
Yeah.
And an interior facade, which is Gothic. And the crypt of one end of the cathedral. There's one other thing that we can talk about between what was built and afterwards, which is he built a little schoolhouse.
Yeah.
For the children of the workers of the cathedral.
Oh, yeah. Should we talk about how the outside of it is kind of structured? I
think the first thing we can talk about there is we can talk about in detail, really, is this. Yeah. And the most striking thing by far of what existed prior to the 1970s is the Nativity facade. It is very tall.
Yeah.
It is like 1/3, or maybe a quarter of the width, probably more like a quarter of the width of the block. 4 towers, which are very, very tall, kind of thin coming in domes of the shape that we've seen, topped with huge crosses, huge guardian crosses.
Yeah.
And they have, they're like belfries with kind of stone louvers coming out of them.
Yeah.
In a slightly corkscrewing pattern. Underneath that, there's a very tall. It's not like a tympanum, because that's the bit underneath.
Yeah.
But like a very tall, pointy bit
above the door.
Yeah, above the door. But it goes up a really tall way.
Well, yeah, it's kind of a portal, but it's way beyond a portal.
It's kind of. I don't think we're in strict like portal territory, but on the like reaching to the top of the highest point that's not the towers is. Oh, the towers have a little bridge between them, and the inner 2 are taller than the outer 2.
Yeah.
And underneath that, the stone which was rough above becomes a continuous surface of sculpture, in which kind of bits of what feel like foliage or clouds or tufts of rock kind of come out of a smooth surface, which then has sculptural scenes depicting elements of the Nativity.
Yeah.
And that comes down in a kind of rough, rugged way of continuous sculptural surface to the entrances themselves.
Kind of curly kale is the impression.
Yeah. but with lots of
with
creatures and figures and things living in between it.
Yeah.
And it's a kind of impressive work of sculpture, actually.
Yeah, it's this like kind of continuous moulded surface with... They do sometimes feel a little bit incongruous, these little figures, because they're quite small in relation to the scale of the overall portal. And they feel small and slightly toy-like in the scale of the building. And but otherwise it's very striking at this kind of continuously moulded surface, and the way that there are these three big pointed kind of grotto portals, the tops of which are, feel kind of stalactite like, drooping over above the doors, and the way they all merge together.
This feels like, Ruskin was looking for a new Gothic.
Yeah.
This feels like a pretty convincing version of that to me, because
Yeah.
it feels Gothic, but it feels decidedly after the 19th century.
Yeah.
I think it's quite... The sculptural element, I think, is quite successful.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I think definitely this facade, of the two that have been realised, this one is like obviously vastly superior. The other...
we will... I think we should have a separate bit where we talk about like the realisation of his plans, because I think the design for this one might have been more developed, but I also think the realisation is better.
Yeah, vastly. Yeah, so there are these three facades. This is one on the side, and then the one on the front of the cathedral, as it were, is the Passion. And then the one on the other side, which is left to be built, is the... Isn't that right? Or is the Glory?
No, they built...
No,
the second thing that was... So when the project was restarted, but I think we should actually discuss all the bits that he built. And then...
Yeah.
The first things that were built, they built a column in the 50s
to
try and get the geometry of it. And then it was to try and kind of replicate the facade on the other side, which is the Passion facade.
The Passion. Okay, so then the
Glory
front
facade has yet to be built.
Glory, yeah.
Which is the one with lots of mushrooms. The Nativity facade kind of works in three, or it's got like three faces. There's a distant face, which has got this massing, which creates a silhouette in the urban context, and it kind of exists as a part of the whole building. And it talks to these tall forms to create this like complicated silhouette with crosses on the tips. Up close, up closer, when you're within the kind of perimeter of the block, or like its rough area, it works as this kind of Gothic style story, continuous surface landscape of sculpture, where the stone becomes a forest or natural landscape of rock, in which the story of the Nativity is told quite loosely, but like lots of figures are there.
Yeah.
And it has the humane quality of Gothic sculpture, where various sorts of human activity are going on, as well as natural life existing in this. And then there's and those two, the formal relationship of the first scale and the second scale, they're quite different.
Yeah.
But they do not jar with each other, I would say, when you're there.
No.
Because once you're up close, you experience this Passion sculpture, and then you look up and you see the towers, but you're really, they're not occupying a huge amount of your view. The continuous sculptural surface is obviously quite a different material and sort of aesthetic to the towers, which are kind of rough stone.
No.
And then there's a volte-face when you would walk through into the empty void of the cathedral and look round, and the back is a sort of simplified but quite thick Gothic facade.
I mean, it's still a bit eccentric, the interior Gothic. It has a lot of... The modelling of the surface has lots and lots of corbelling, and it has lots of sort of strange, funny miniature columns and things. There's a lot of stuff that I can't quite understand what's going on with it, and to what extent there are things which are... we're in for some sort of purpose which now is not part of the design anymore. Or
there's a bit of the thinking from Casa Vicens, where everything is kind of
corbelling outwards,
like corbelling out, and there's a level of detail at which everything is dithered or like becomes very complex, but not more or less. But here it's all like one continuous material, which is the stone. It's now obviously completely clean on the inside, whereas like in old photographs, it's really dirty. I never got to see it.
Yeah.
before it was. I've only seen it like in a kind of relatively recent incarnation. It's strange that that's on the other side.
Yes.
Because it must have been built according to the same design. I don't know how much we need to add to it, but like it is, when you start looking at it, you start to see the different buildings that the building is made of start to like become apparent. Like
the successive ages of the building sort of seem to have been swallowed by one another.
The exterior of the Nativity facade is still not like the final Gaudi.
Yeah.
But it is a like very resolved thing. And I think actually the work of the sculptor, this is a supposition, but I would say the working relationship between the sculptor and Gaudi has been very successful, because I can't believe the sculpture is really designed by Gaudi, but it works it is a great complement to his vision.
Yeah.
And that's not something that should be taken as a given when you're having two different creative minds working on a project.
Should we talk about the other facades, or?
Okay, we can do that. Let's talk about first, before we talk about what they built, let's talk about the things that we have that describe the other facades from him.
There are basically a couple of model photos of the way that the other facades were meant to work.
There's the drawing, which I think is the main thing for the Passion facade, and there is a model and a drawing, but the model is better, of the Glory facade.
Yeah, and the Passion facade is...
Well, the top bit, the towers, are almost the same.
Yeah, it's got what looks almost like a kind of gallery, except it's been sort of tilted, it's been sort of skewed in the middle, so that it becomes like a kind of mountain seen from below, with these enormous splayed columns, so that the sculptural scene of the Passion is under the shelter of these dramatic inward pointing columns.
In the surviving drawing we've got, he doesn't draw anything that's mirrored. It's a drawing which is in very like sharp chiaroscuro light, emphasizing this kind of depth.
Yeah, in the drawing, these kind of big columns which are pointing in are quite kind of dramatically sort of sinew-like. They're kind of twisting. And then, most of the sculpture is invisible because of the depth of the shadow above it. But it feels it's sculpted, it's modelled in a very kind of planar, prismatic sort of way, rather than a kind of leafy foliagey sort of way.
And there was an intent where nativities, the kind of gentle birth of Christ, right? Mm-hmm. And the Passion is his death. And it's a kind of harder, harsher topic, and it's kind of angular. And also to me, like a lot of it is talking about bones. Tiara on the top feels like a sort of forest where all the trees are bones with little bobbles on top. It's dark and crystalline, and in the gloom there's a kind of crowd, there's like a procession of figures that goes towards the crucified Christ who's in the middle.
I mean, I think its realisation leaves something to be desired, but
it feels really different to that drawing in real life. Like because I guess you're down at the bottom, the columns at the bottom feel really big compared to those at the top.
I think that there's also, in a funny way, they seem to have lost a bit of the kind of prismatic quality of the ground, and they seem to instead have applied it to the heads and bodies of the figures, who have a kind of distinctly low. Well,
like low some of the figures literally have like
to them.
Bits taken from other Gaudi buildings on them. The kind of Roman soldiers have got, their heads are the chimneys from Casamia.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
I'm not sure it's great. I mean, they've also done various things, like in the drawing, very obviously Jesus is at the bottom between the two doors, and in the as-built scheme he's right up at the top, which is sort of...
The sculpture is much more boring in the real thing.
It's not great.
Or the arrangement of the sculpture.
It's by a guy called Giuseppe Maria Subirachs.
I don't know. It could be all right. It's much more static than what was drawn there anyway. It's like a number of figures with a lot of plain wall. Another thing that I saw in the drawing, if you look at the columns, they've actually got decoration on them. They've got like crosses.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if there was a level of maybe colour.
Yeah.
Or
he did talk about wanting to make them polychromatic.
Yeah, like it seemed to me that these might be the inlaid coloured tiles in the Colonia Güell Church, or at least something in that direction is kind of nodded to.
Yeah.
Where like you've got like prismatic geometric detail and then color breaking up these columns.
Yeah.
Although the sculpture is much more geometric and sharp, it's still making a landscape with different layers of landscape. There's kind of around the door, there's kind of angled like bas relief planes that have got kind of figures inhabiting them, and then like two paths with different characters leading up to the kind of foot of the cross, which just has got a lot more going on, but it also has this like third, you like go, I might be interpreting this way too much, but I think you go underneath the portal and you've got like another one of these like crown of thorn things.
Yeah.
Which is like all of the figures making up another kind of diamond, which would, I guess, work in a perspective and might work with the shadow. I don't know. We also don't know. It's much easier to do like impressionistic drawing than it is to really realize that as something that works in space. Yeah. And I think part of the weakness of what it is now is that actually once that thing's put in perspective, like all columns are angled in perspective if you're looking up.
Yeah. And then the third facade, which is the one which it doesn't exist at all, is the glory facade, which is going to be on the front, which is this.
I don't like the second the model they've made of it now.
So here's the model that they have a photo of. They look like sort of little witches' hats made of white icing or something, which are all
like
kind
really
of
tall, thin mushrooms,
all kind of merging and then becoming clouds as they go up, and then they're overlaid with something which looks a bit like the balconies from the Casa Milà or something. This kind of like thin, seaweedy, metallic kind of growth,
which becomes clouds saying sort of Gloria, Gloria, Gloria.
Yeah.
And then there are more bigger towers,
yeah,
which also are pleated.
Yeah,
like the main body towers, and then below the mushrooms have columns, like a forest, and there are 8 columns on either side of the main portal, and they can't possibly have enough space for all those stairs because there's a road right in front of it.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't quite know how that's going to be resolved. At the moment, this facade is a big wall of blank concrete.
Yeah. What can you say? It's got a lot of towers already, and they're going to build even more. They're going to build.
Yeah, how many more are they actually building? They're like
4 more on that facade, and then
the
one,
the big one,
the absolutely massive one.
Yeah, and there's more pinnacles on the body of the church.
Yeah,
it sort of starts with Gothic columns, and then how many rows of they're tall isosceles triangles with round windows in them, oval windows.
Yeah.
Which are kind of cut away in this continuous curving surface.
Yeah. Well, you've got this like layering of so you've got the kind of.
It's funny we're spending all this time describing something that like basically anyone who knows architecture like already knows. But I think we should carry on anyway.
So there's the kind of outer perimeter, and then there's the outer aisle, and then there's the next aisle in, and then there's the nave. So there's like a layering of like 4, and each one getting massively higher on the outside than the previous one. So each time these kind of big pointy sawtooth forms go up higher and higher and higher. And I don't have a photo, but when in detail they have these quite kind of complex sort of sculpting and modelling on the outside. Yeah, sort of like sunburst flower patterns.
It's still definitely coming from the Gothic. Like below, it becomes like a Gothic window, like tracery, but stonework is much more muscular than you would normally expect, and has a very different kind of curve form. Instead of being like lots of fine lines, it's a sort of continuous curving surface that's made of these like revolved and swept hyperbolic curves.
I don't know, like in a way I think the exterior is like going right back to him being a student. He was like into Ruskin, and he was obviously into the romance of architecture. There's a kind of mode of thinking about and visualizing Gothic buildings that kind of imagines them melting into air or becoming kind of quasi-natural, becoming like a mountain, like having the qualities of a cliff, being overgrown with trees and vines and all sorts of things like that. And
this is definitely reaching for the sublime.
Yeah, the kind of specific sort of sublime register of the Gothic in particular.
It's funny because it's like the sublime and the camp.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that he's literalizing, you have like the dream that this thing might actually be kind of infinitely high.
Yeah.
Or that there might be a tower beyond the whatever. But he's actually really like pushed the boat out. When they finally put that enormous, enormous tower on the middle, it's going to look really strange.
It's very big, yeah.
It's going to be so big. In a way, I'm not sure whether it will be improved by having it or not. I think that the facade that was built in his lifetime with the 4 towers was an extremely beautiful form and silhouette on its own.
Have you
putting an enormous thing behind it?
Have you seen the letter which is like "Don't build any more" done in the 50s? Side, like everybody.
Yeah. Well, they've kept going. Now they really do need to finish it, I guess. Having got this far.
I don't think I would necessarily agree that they shouldn't have done any more. I think it's kind of it's a brave and I think maybe appropriate thing to do.
Yeah. But definitely, and it probably is the right thing to do, but certainly things have been lost as well as gained by doing it.
Yeah. Also for the city, it's a really appropriate thing. It wasn't stopped because of the succession of crises ending up with the Civil War and then fascism, but the rebuilding really kicks into gear when that stuff is resolved and Barcelona is like coming out and becoming this fantastic city, and it's an immensely optimistic project.
Yeah.
To do something like so heroic in the realm of building. But it was an immense challenge that the team chose to take on.
Yeah.
Because the guiding light was gone.
Yeah.
Gaudí. His drawings and most of his work was destroyed.
Yeah.
The models were smashed up and they were left with some photographs of some drawings, some photographs of the model, and pieces of the models that had been smashed. I guess there's 3 ways you can continue a masterwork that's been left off for a long way. Yeah. And the one that they chose is the obvious one, but it's not necessarily the easiest. You can leave it. Someone else can take it on and finish it in their way.
Yeah. Or you can
try kind of how cathedrals were built. Yeah. Or you can try and revivify, raise from the dead.
Yeah.
The architect, like in Ubik.
Yeah.
Speak to him in the machine and get this funny echo back.
I mean, I think it's been quite successful, that technique.
Yeah, but I think there's bits that it is inevitably being built with a slightly different sensibility because he wouldn't have followed his plan.
No, he would have changed his mind about a lot of stuff, inevitably. But that is impossible to anticipate.
Yeah, that's something they could have done better.
Yeah.
Do you want to do the interior?
Yeah, let's talk a bit about the interior. So, I mean, the interior, this is like an obvious thing to say. It's extremely high.
Yeah.
The photo that people generally take is you have to try and go right in the middle of the crossing and take a photo straight up. So you get this very bizarre kind of flattening of the branching of all of the columns. Yeah, the impression is of this extremely high space. It's a lot of coloured light of different colours coming through these densely intermeshed branches of the upper parts of the columns supporting the different parts of the vaulting of the nave and the different aisles. It's confusing. My impression when I was there was this is kind of overwhelming.
Some of the flavours in that pie are really strong.
Yeah. But it does successfully create an experience of something which is impossible to comprehend or to kind of rationalise. Comprehend in the sense of kind of rationalising what's actually going on. It's just too complex as a kind of, an expression of the sorts of things that it's trying to evoke. I think it's very successful. The colouring of the light
is really strong.
Yeah.
You go around and it's kind of
Yeah.
It's really viscerally bright in the lower level, I think. Yeah. It's really viscerally everything is yellow in this place and everything is orange in this place and everything is blue in this place.
Yeah.
And I guess that changes as the sun goes around a bit, as light comes in from different corners. It's super tall in the middle and a bit like some of the wide Spanish cathedrals like Seville Cathedral or something.
Yeah.
You're in a huge space and it feels much obviously vastly taller than something like Seville Cathedral and much brighter.
Yeah.
But it also has that thing of like there's so much place. I'm not quite sure a French or English Gothic cathedral.
Yeah.
When they're kind of that, there is like one thing. The English one it's really tend to be really long.
Yeah.
And there's this like really long big view. And in the French one, it's like really tall, fat space, which is a bit more spread out. And this one is kind of lots of things, and there's like loads of detail.
Yeah.
And there isn't like there's a sort of concentration at the crossing.
Yeah.
But there isn't.
It doesn't have the
super
kind of
concentration.
I'm not sure that the kind of directionality which he seems to sort of stress as being important in the Colonia Güell, for example, really comes across here. Like, I don't feel like your attention is really forced towards the altar.
I can't remember the altar at all. Like, quite normally these churches have got a huge thing which is saying, like, God's at this end. And the apse is, like, this, like, oldest bit, and it's the
darkest bit of the church, because it has this sort of ghost of this extremely sort of medieval pattern. The columns are arranged in a semicircular pattern around the back of the altar. I mean, it's exactly the same thing that you find in St Bartholomew the Great or something in London, the kind of 12th century church, 11th century church, I think. It's a kind of a cloud. It's a sort of you enter into a mystery on the inside.
The ceiling and the highnesses are stunning.
Yeah.
There's like so much going on as you look up. There's all these columns, there's all these frills, there's decoration, which is kind of geometric in the sense that you start with one shape and then you draw lines around that, and then you cut lines around that. But everything is kind of like pinked or like frilled, and every surface is convoluted, and then it goes up and up through windows and columns and windows and columns and branches, and then up to these sort of dishes that make the roof, which feel a bit like
they're all holed. They're slightly sphincterish actually. The kind of puckered dish with the little hole in the middle. Maybe like a sunflower or something. Yeah.
Yeah, the dark middle is weird actually.
Yeah, it's peculiar.
I think he was applying this geometry too much.
Yeah.
They feel a bit like round things hanging underneath something.
Yeah.
You know, like in the Johnson wax.
Yeah.
Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yeah.
Of this bit, there's this big circles which are kind of doing a very different job there. But like they feel like big hanging circular things. These don't feel like they are. It doesn't feel like they're natural extensions of the columns making a vault like a Gothic building. They're like funny star things.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this isn't a statement of badness. This is a statement of this is strange and dense. There's also so many people there that it's kind of irritating. Which I think can put you off slightly.
Yeah, it is a bit annoying. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? They're into it. They want to go. And then internally, this sort of layering of the new on the old creates these very peculiar effects. There are places where the two languages are very kind of inimical. It really feels like a building from one era being built on top of the ruins of another or something. Quite striking. And there are, these strange moments like the kind of orphaned springing point of an arch that's obviously meant to go somewhere and is actually no longer part of the design.
And it's strange because like cathedrals have that, but normally it's like one bit and another bit. Like, okay, the facades from one time that was put on like 400 years later. The Holy End's like 11th century, and then the main bit's 13th century, and then the front's done in the 1700s, and there's a crossing and a lady chapel, and they're all different. But they are like, they often have their own identity a bit. As a like wonder, it's full grade. It is a wonder. It's huge and wondrous. It is not a clear work of architecture. It's a mess on the inside, especially at the level of like. It's also, I think, really missing his touch at the level of detail.
Yeah,
like he breathes so much life into his buildings by doing so much cool and unique detailing.
Yeah, and also in the choice of materials and the working of the materials, which he takes right down to this very kind of the level of the craftsmanship, all sorts of decisions which seem to be made in the most immediate way. Whereas as a project, this is very much, it's just the form that's left. It's a kind of, there obviously are decisions about materiality, and you probably left some kind of intentions about different sorts of stone. Also, for very understandable reasons, they've departed from some of the original material choices because they were no longer available. It was the original sandstone is not extractable currently.
Some things, I think, even if they are exactly what he chose, they're not right. He wouldn't have, like on the Passion facade.
Yeah.
The top thing is really white compared to the bottom, and it doesn't feel right.
Yeah, no, it doesn't look
like
right, does it?
The shapes are like really complex, and like they've executed this really difficult thing.
Yeah.
Everything in here has been done like well, and it's all cooked well, you know.
There's some amazing stone cutting going on to create some of these
the
forms.
The kind of level of building technology is extraordinary.
Yeah.
Like, it's really amazing. And the amount of love that's been put into making this thing is like out of this world. The amount of people that must have worked on it and really like labored on it, like really the embodied work is extraordinary. This is the thing that loads of those architectural theorists were talking about, like the unifying, glowing beacon building.
Yeah.
This is the thing that Bruno Taut wanted.
Yeah.
The building which like glorifies and brings people together as this like amazing wonderwork.
Yeah.
It's also at points a kind of Ruskinian synthesis of like craft and person, although becoming less and less so, I would say.
At one level, you can see so many kind of strands moving through history and, into Gaudi and into this building. And then there's also so much which just comes out of this really amazing process that he has. Stuff which can only arise out of the really, really particular setup they had, the team they had, the people he was able to work with, the things that they were able to try again. You can't sort of set off to try and do building like this. It's something which turns out to be possible when you've been doing an awful lot of other things for a very, very long time, and you sort of are able to spot a bunch of opportunities that wouldn't be visible to anybody else. Do you think people actually go to church there? Or
I reckon some people do.
Maybe
but
some,
I reckon the ratio of people visiting, I don't know. I mean, it was meant to be a church to inspire people.
To inspire them to be faithful and good Catholics.
I mean, at various points I've been thinking about, like, when we're talking in this episode about how these things work as religious buildings.
Yeah.
And I feel kind of remote from it.
You're meant to have, like, 12,000 people in there. It's for a kind of mega congregation to come together.
It kind of makes sense, really. Like, if it was just for its community, why would there be that many people going to that church?
I guess they lived very densely, or...
But they didn't. We've seen they didn't.
Yeah.
It was all fields.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. It wasn't all fields, but there were fields.
I guess it's just hopeful, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't think they had like a really fixed idea of like what it's religious. I think there's a lot of like, if you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
I don't know how like Gaudi, like what the god is. It's something of nature, but this one doesn't feel anything like as natural. Like the god of the Colonial World Church feels like all of these things have been taken that are the constituents of the life.
Yeah.
They are like both the kind of products that people have in their hands, the like darning needles and the kind of like broken industrial things, merged into a landscape that is like life and like the products of creation and like the great landscape.
The god of the world, of the universe.
Yeah.
The book of nature.
Yeah, that's it. And that makes coherent sense.
Whereas this is much more of a god of symbols, isn't it? It's a god of allegories and a god of scripture.
And bright light and geometry.
Brightly
coloured light and geometry and really complex fractal geometries.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, like lots of architects have that little drawing in their portfolio, which is a sort of their kind of daydream megalomaniac thing. But this one actually gets built.
It is a wonder to behold.
Yeah.
It's exhausting,
Yeah. I don't know how much more we can say about it, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's we can talk about the little church. I mean, the little school.
Oh, yeah. Should we talk about the little school?
And then...
Yeah. We can talk about what happens next. So, yeah, he built a school for the children of the workers, which I think was demolished at least once, maybe twice, and in its latest incarnation has been reconstructed near one of the portals. But it's this fascinating little building made from, are they like tile
That's
walls?
the material of Catalan vaulting, I think. It's like, a couple of layers of tiles with like bonding between them.
So it's extremely minimal. It has this sort of undulating plan, and then it has a wiggly roof as well.
It's kind of like a rectangle that has been like wiggled.
Yeah, a wiggled rectangle.
And then the roof is...
They're kind of, they're corrugations, but where the peaks and the troughs have been pushed off by one.
Yeah, if you've got like a single stick.
Yeah.
And then you put cross braces along it. And then you sort of like undulated it so that some of them tip one way and then it goes level and then they tip the other way.
Yeah.
You get this thing that kind of frills on either side, alternating.
Yeah.
But has a like straight line down the middle.
Yeah.
And then all of the lines are straight, but it makes a corrugation, like it's offset.
Yeah, and it's a very sweet little building. I think when you visit, there are some pictures of the children having their lessons. It all looks rather progressive. There's a nice picture of them all doing some kind of experiment with a big kind of enclosure full of gravel and water. Well, there's another nice one, which I don't have a good picture of, where they all seem to be exploring kind of mechanics with like big, like hinged sort of unfolding kind of rulers of some kind, all wearing their little smocks. It looks very sweet. Apparently they all had a little plant they were given, which sounds like nursery today, really. I think Le Corbusier was a fan. I think it's one of his Gaudi buildings he enjoyed. It's one of the classic, Gaudi on a budget, very minimal, just a little bit of really brilliant sort of ingenuity applied in a very smart way.
There's like one idea. There's several details, 2 materials, which is this roof and Catalan vaulting, and it's a box with a few rooms in it.
Yeah.
And it works great. A lovely, sensitive project. Like really, this would crit really well.
Yes.
Some present of this, it's like really clear. It's kind of resolved. You then say like, could you work more with the plan and like develop a more complex?
Yeah.
But actually, I think the resolution is great.
It's perfect. It makes a very funny contrast between it and the cathedral as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's like the opposite.
Yeah. Well, should we talk about what happens next? So Gaudi died. I think we talked about it in the first ever episode. He was run over by a tram. In a way, his death, I feel like, speaks a little bit about some of the things which made it a bit of an unhappy society. He didn't really care about his personal appearance. This is all part of his kind of self-imposed exile from polite society and the architectural establishment and things like that. There was a period when he was working on the Sagrada Familia when the more Catholic of the architecture students would kind of do a little mini pilgrimage out to go and talk to him and ask him important lessons about building and things like that they weren't learning from their more secular tutors. But yeah, his clothes were sort of fairly ragged and kind of gaunt and pretty unkempt. And so anyway, one day in, is it 1926? Tram driver struck what he thought was a drunken tramp by his own testimony. And then stopped the tram, moved him out of the way, and then carried on going. And then, various people tried to intervene and try to get him taken to one or another hospital. None of the taxi drivers were prepared to take him. And eventually he ended up somewhere. But it took a long time for him to be, identified and for people actually to be informed that this had happened. And he died, I think, a couple of days later. And his funeral, which we've got a picture of, was held in a kind of among the bits of the Sagrada Familia that had been constructed at the time.
At that point, almost all of what was built until the 50s had been built. They were just finishing. They just put the concrete Guardian cross on the first column would come out of its scaffolding, and they were finishing off the other ones.
Yeah.
And I think work would continue for like a year or something.
Yeah.
And then they ran out of money. I think works had stopped or got like very slow several times before, but that was a bit of a hiatus. And then things were taking a rather different political turn in Barcelona. It was becoming more radical, and then we slip into the Civil War.
Yeah.
And in the Republican time, his studio was destroyed and was burnt.
Yeah.
And various things were smashed up, and that was a rather unpleasant time in Spanish history. Some works, there were people, disciples, keeping the dream of building this thing alive, and there was a bit of, I think they built a column. They tried to like get this idea of how to do a column in the 50s, but I get a sense that works really only started gathering up a head of steam like in the late 60s, early 70s, when they started working towards building the Passion facade, which went up then. Well, work really accelerated like in the late 90s onwards. And I think it's basically people start visiting a lot and paying to visit.
Yeah.
And then that generated the money which has built it. And it's been going at a real clip.
Yeah, they're going to get there. They were trying to get there for the centenary of his death, but they're going to miss it, apparently.
Yeah, that seems fine. I mean, it's definitely a lot of forward movement going on.
It's more than half done.
Consider, I would say it's 80% done.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
There's the biggest facade left, and they got to finish off the tower.
Yeah, and there's one or two little bits, but
yeah, I think there's another one of the.
It's nearly all there.
There's lots and lots of things in it that we haven't described, and we haven't gone too much into the geometry or the design things, because I think
it's hard
it will be such tortuous listening doing those things.
Yeah. Also, I'm completely out of my depth in all that stuff.
None of it's mega complicated. Like, it's so much easier now. You've got a computer. You can just smash the things out. But I've had a problem looking at it. There just isn't like loads of drawings you can look at really easily to like work out what's going on. Actually, a lot of the discussion of Gaudí is quite like people wanting it to be a thing, or wanting it to be mystical.
Yeah.
Or something to be really special and singular. But actually, I think his process is really, it's like you'll have a big idea, but then it's quite chaotic and granular.
Yeah.
And like designing lots and lots of things. And like you'll have this like clear arching idea, but then it will be disturbed lots and lots of times. And that's kind of how the process works.
Yeah.
And it's just not like these little projects like the school are like really clear what the idea is. But lots of his things, the idea is something which cannot easily be put either into a drawing or into words.
Yeah.
And it can be like, it's like a sensibility. I think it can make it easy to, and I'm sure we've done this too, like go down false alleys and like looking at describing the buildings. I'm sure I've made like gross errors in my understanding, but I'd rather put something out there.
Yeah, that's all right.
So, 2 questions.
Okay.
Oh, they finished that. They'll have loads of cash left.
Oh, yeah. What should they do with it?
Should they build the Colonia Church? And do you have any advice for them?
Why not? You have to have a way of making it up on site, which is the most difficult thing.
Should they do one next to it first to get there right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. build a 1/10 scale model with very tiny bricks or something. It would be nice to do it, wouldn't it? It would be nice to do that one. You would have to make up so much of it.
Yeah, there's like, you thought there wasn't much information for, and the design was incomplete for the Sagrada Familia. I mean,
yeah, I guess I sort of feel like we have all this technology now. Like he was so pushing at the limits of what was.
But something that's but he was deliberately being anachronistic with his technological solution to making things. He was like having it. It was like he could have drawn it. He didn't. He got the guy to put it in there on site. He could have made it of anything, but he made it of like broken stones and nails.
Yeah.
And like rocks he dug up out of the ground that didn't change.
Surely, why can't we do that?
We can.
Yeah.
Takes a lot of work.
People aren't though, are they?
Well, that approach requires a lot of labour.
People aren't though.
A lot of skilled labour.
Yeah. I don't know. I think people also aren't, like, just on a geometric level. Like, we have incredible capacity to produce geometry and simulate stuff. It's sort of enviably, from the point of view of that time, like, easy to produce geometry that would be very, very hard to kind of concretize at that time.
But the way it's concretized is really funny and interesting. But actually,
maybe you need the
you can make something
though.
out of material to generate an idea. Like, generating ideas in your head is not like, if you were going to actually try and design that church in Rhino from scratch to get that idea, I think it would still be really hard.
Yeah.
Whereas if someone gave you that design, drawing it would be it'd still be challenging, but it would be much easier. Very, very doable. If you gave me enough information, it's like something I feel like I could do. I could at least start.
Yeah.
But designing it from scratch, I mean, it's probably easier, but it's not. I don't think it's like. I think also like the enthusiasm of a new idea, if like a form.
Yeah.
He's coming up with these forms, and he's seeing them, and then he's like working with that really slowly for ages. My other question was like, what does this all mean? Like, we've gone on this huge arc.
Oh, we've gone on this,
and like
the Gaudí Odyssey.
He's like a rocket.
Yeah.
And it starts. I feel like there's this flow of like architects, and he's definitely an eccentric, and there's other people kind of going off in other directions. But I feel he just is a rocket that just goes so far off in this direction. Yeah. I think one of the reasons is that he was charismatic, brilliant, and had someone paying for it. And the really extraordinary works were paid for by Güell.
Yeah.
This like limitless money.
Yeah.
That ran out.
Well, he was doing something at a time where labour was a bit cheaper. It was really possible to do some quite out there things. He also had a money is no object patron. He was able to work on things for an extremely long time.
I mean, I think he was a genius.
And even so, he was pushing things to the very limit and beyond of what was actually possible. That's what makes him a kind of sort of historical isolate, isn't it?
I think he was also an extraordinary person and designer.
Yeah.
Like, extraordinary.
It's very hard to have a kind of...
definitely like a 1 in a million.
Yeah. But it's very hard to have a kind of post-Gaudí architecture, isn't it? Because where would you push it further?
No, I don't think that makes sense.
Yeah.
To do that.
It's always
but
I
often don't think
limit of something.
You should be like like I think we've still got this myth of like Le Corbusier or whatever. I'm like, oh, this person, this heroic figure is going to change everything. We're going to follow them. And I don't think it was like that then. I don't think that's actually what happens. And I don't think that's what should happen. You can have works that have been nudged by Gaudí.
Yeah.
That have been influenced by Gaudí, but they are necessarily different.
It's one of the great offices it would have been interesting to see inside. Even things like the specification. They must have had someone going out and finding all of these interesting materials.
Yeah.
They must have had like a few eager young fellows going out and...
He did have people drawing for him.
Yeah.
Like, there were draftsmen in the office. Like, it's not like...
You would have had to, yeah.
Like...
Yeah.
Well, some of these people who carried on were people who helped. So, like, he didn't work alone.
No, of course not, no. Yeah, and he had all of, also the kind of people...
I mean...
doing the models and things.
Like, of course not, but, like, sometimes when you hear this sort of... Because he was such a dominant character, you'd think that he was.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I think there are a lot of other very creative people who are able to contribute. How were they doing it? How were they organising it? How did all the really banal stuff of just who does what?
I mean, I think he's on site a lot.
Yeah.
With the good projects, it's both like I don't think completely knowable, but also a research exercise that we haven't
done.
I think it
But
would be like
it's fun to.
it's not. No one's
fun to
serving it up
imagine.
to us on a platter, so we don't know.
No. Yeah, if someone could make a 20-minute documentary about it, that'd be lovely. Yeah, I mean, I think there are people doing lots of work on his various assistants, and they're quite well understood as characters and the sorts of particular things that they brought to the process.
A myth that is, I'm sure I've already sort of taken on, and might be a stalker, is the people say that like the Nouveau or the Expressionist architecture is like a path not taken. And I don't believe that at all. The reason that box modernism won isn't because of its style or because of a kind of conspiracy. It's because it's boxes. You can take away all the nice architecture and you're kind of left with something that still looks like it.
Yeah. No, it's a path not takeable, really.
Yeah. Like, there's another way in which less is more, which is that, like, those Bruno Tout flats are really tiny.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have, like, maniac builders nowadays? Like, religious maniacs or egotistical maniacs? I guess they're harder to get things off the ground. Like, I don't feel that, like, Zaha Hadid did these kind of, like, really remarkable buildings. Really pushed it a long way. And, like, I think it was, like, absolutely the dominant thing in her life by far. But I don't feel this mania.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing. I mean, it was difficult enough, I think.
Yeah.
To work for.
Yeah.
But I feel this period is full of, like, people who just worked all the time and were, like, maniacal designers.
Yeah.
Like, devoting themselves to it. And I feel that, like, it's not like people don't work all the time now. The output is different.
Yeah.
I can think of several architects in this period who are like, I'm going to design 700 custom things for this project.
Yeah.
Myself.
Yeah. No, that is the kind of hero architect of this period, is someone who's like goes to work, designs like 20 things.
Yeah.
And then the drafting room outputs them all.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to be possible in the present day. There's more, you run into all these kind of integration problems, I think.
Yeah.
And I think there's just a lot more other crap to deal with.
Well, I think we're getting to the end of Gaudí.
Yeah, I think that...
Do you have any further questions or thoughts?
I can't even remember why we started or how. It's all so long ago. But it's been great, yeah. I mean, the buildings are great.
Cool. Visit them.
Yeah.
In the off-season.
Yes. Not when it's raining, though. They close fast. Chunks of them. Yeah. The rain is like an emergency in Barcelona.
Well, it doesn't rain there all that often.
Yeah, no, it's very alarming when it does. It's well, thank you very much for listening, and as ever, all the photos and things that we've collected as part of our research will be going up in a sort of curated form on our social media at about_buildings.
We'll be talking about something different next.
Yes, something very different.
Yeah.
So look forward to that.
Okay.
All
Good
right.
night. Bye-bye. Thank you for sticking with us.